Okay. So you recording your end?
Um,
Or
okay, let me try. Oh no, I need to be a host, a
co-host it?
co-host.
That's okay. I'll sort it this end. Second. More. Record to this computer.
Recording in progress.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. And as usual, Pastor Rio will what's the word? Curate. Keep an eye on what's going on in the background. So thank you for that. Right. So we're looking at strengthening marriage. Okay. So marriage was originally God's idea. Bible says in Genesis 1 and verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So while it is not explicitly stated in Genesis, when God brings Adam and Eve together, that represents the first marriage. Ellen White talks about that. So God created marriage; He put it in place. So where whatever uh, society is trying to do in terms of redefining marriage is not valid because God is the one who created marriage. He is the one who defines what it is, what it represents. Genesis 2 and verse 24, the man said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. And I think we spoke before about this one flesh concept is so much more than physical union. It represents physical, intellectual, emotional, under the banner, under the umbrella of spirituality. And if a more accurate diagram would actually put spirituality as the umbrella, and all the rest are different facets of spirituality. So this was God's intention when he created the marriage institution. So the idea is that the man and the woman, um, the closer they get together, as they form their union, their ties to their family of origin are lessened, and their ties to each other increases. Their priorities shift from one to the other. And that's one of the challenges that some marriages have, is that they don't cut the tie. They don't leave and cleave in the way that they should, so that the ties to their family of origin remain stronger than they should, and so that their commitment to each other is not as strong as it should be. Proverbs 18 verse 22, he who finds a wife finds finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. So the Bible just tells us that marriage is something that God created for the benefit of mankind. When it works well, it is. So the purpose of marriage is to spiritually, emotionally, physically unite a man and a woman in a covenantal relationship between themselves and their creator. And this concept of covenant is so important. It's vitally important. We cannot understand what marriage is unless we appreciate the covenantal aspect of it. And a covenant is simply an agreement between two or more parties to adhere to the conditions of the covenant. So when a man and a woman stand before the pastor and they recite their vows to love, honor, and all the rest of it, that represents the covenant. And it's a covenant which couples make with each other, but they make it with God. So God is the one who brings the couple together, hopefully, and he is the one who will sustain their relationship. Malachi 2 verse 14, the Lord has been witness between you and the wife of your youth. She is your companion and your wife by covenant. And I think we looked at in the session on sexuality that every covenant has a covenant sign, and that sexual union is the covenant sign of the marriage relationship. Genesis 2 and verse 18, and the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. What this passage tells us is that God created us to be communal beings. He created us for connection. And we just touched on the nature of that connection. It is to embrace every aspect of our humanity. And what modern day research has found, research in terms of neurobiology, that people who don't experience intimate, close relationships suffer psychologically, suffer emotionally, suffer even physically. So we need people, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be married. That's not what the Bible communicates to us, but it does communicate to us that everybody should experience intimate, close relationships. Because our brains, our minds function best when they are in connection with other minds. And again, this is clear to see in research and in experience, observation, that people who are deprived of intimate relationships don't thrive very well. Above all human relationships, our marriages should be a place of safety. It is so sad to see, when couples have been married and they go through a crisis, and their marriages are the opposite of what they should be. It should be this place of safety where people can feel free to express their hearts. They can feel physically safe in their relationships, emotionally safe in their relationships. It's not always the case, but the marriage of all relationships, should be the place where couples can feel safe. Ephesians 5 and verse 33. Each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. And here Paul is simply recognizing that husbands and wives, men and women, that naturally have different motivations, different needs within a relationship. Now, this is not to say that men don't need love and women don't need respect. It works both ways. But what Paul's words are simply recognizing the differences between men and women. Ecclesiastes 4. 2 are better than 1, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. So Solomon here, we can draw an illustration from Solomon's words that a marriage is represented by a threefold cord. And a threefold cord, rope makers tell us, is the strongest type of cord that you can have. 3 is stronger than 2. If you try and add a 4th, it actually weakens the rope. Threefold cord is the strongest that you can have. And that is not quickly broken. And the illustration we draw from that, again, is that God is the one who is the glue that holds a marriage together. Now, this doesn't mean that people who are not Christians or who don't believe in God can't have strong marriages. I think we did speak about this in one of our earlier sessions, but let's just tease that out a bit. Is it possible for folks who don't believe in God to have a good relationship? And if so, how can that be? How is it that folks who don't have a belief in God can still have healthy relationships? What do you think? Or can you remember what we discussed about that? How can folks who don't believe in God?
I can't remember what we discussed, but yes, but I do know, yes, they can have that relationship, but it just doesn't have the same foundation that we would have as Christians.
Yeah.
Having God in there.
Yeah. Folks who don't believe in God can still operate by good relational principles. And if they do that, they can enjoy a healthy relationship. But as Natales just said, they won't have that added aspect of spiritual strength, which God gives to a marriage. But yeah, folks who don't believe in God can still have good relationships if they operate the principles, the good relational principles. Psalm 127 verse 3, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. So when a marriage comes together, it is essential, and this is something that we stress as much as possible at the premarital stage, that bearing in mind that we are experiencing spiritual warfare, and that the enemy of our souls hates marriage, that everything in his power to destroy marriage, then we need to make sure that our marriages begin on a strong spiritual footage. So the marriage covenant is dependent upon the empowering of the Holy Spirit. We need to be reliant on him because of the great controversy that we are a part of. So marriage can only fulfill God's purpose when two genuinely spiritual people live by genuinely spiritual principles. And those principles are founded on love. In Galatians 5 and verse 23, we read a kind of definition, an outline of what constitutes love. And we often read that passage incorrectly. So the fruit of the Spirit is love. Excuse me. And all the other words in that passage are adjectives of love. So love is peaceful, love is kind, love is patient, love is good, faithful, gentle, self-controlled. All of these are different aspects of love. And this is the foundation, the agape, the other-centered love. Mark says, or Jesus says in Mark 10 verse 9, that what therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. And I've always thought of that in terms of marital breakdown, affairs and the like. But I'm seeing it more and more in terms of what's happening in our society. That we're living in a society where marriage is seen as less and less important. I mentioned before the redefinition of marriage in terms of allowing for same-sex couples to get married. Marriage is being attacked from all sides, and these all constitute attempts for mankind to put asunder what God has put in place. And so it is vitally important that we in the church become champions for marriage. We need to be able to explain why marriage is so important to a society. And we've made the point before that if the family can be destroyed, then that destroys the community. it destroys the society. So we have a task to uphold the importance of marriage. And part of that is educating the church, educating our young people as to why marriage is important, because society, again, is telling them that it's not. False information about the level of the divorce rate. It's sending a message that, why bother getting married if 1 in 2 couples are getting divorced, and that's a false statistic. It's not the reality. So we need to be intentional about educating both the church and folks within the community about what marriage is and the benefits that people can derive from it. John Gottman, we've mentioned him before, brilliant researcher. He's conducted the most extensive, innovative research into why marriages succeed or fail, and he's done that for over 40 years. And what I like about his stuff is that the vast majority of it is consistent with biblical principles. It's nice to see when science confirms what the Bible is actually saying. Gottman himself is a Jew, and yeah, he's done some brilliant research, and he came up with what he called the sound marital house. So the sound marital house represents the principles or the foundations upon which healthy marriages are built, and we will touch on some of them in this presentation. So he talks about the building of love maps. We'll mention what that is: sharing fondness and admiration, turning toward instead of turning away, developing a positive perspective, dealing with marital conflict, making life's dreams come true, and creating shared meaning. And we will touch on some of these in this presentation and some in the next.
John, can I just come in here and say what a fantastic model that this actually is? I use this quite a lot with couples.
Yeah.
And it really does help them to develop that trust and commitment towards each other.
Yeah. I love Gottman's work. It is so comprehensive. And what I particularly like about Gottman's work is his emphasis on emotional well-being within the context of a marriage, and we'll be expanding on some of that now. Yeah, thanks for that, Dee. So strengthening marriage. What is the number one cause of marital breakdown? So this is a question which Gottman considered, or he commented on the basis of the extensive research that he did. He came up with a response. What do you think that response was? What do you think the answer was to that question? If you were to identify the number one cause, there are many causes, many things that can adversely impact a marriage. But if you were to point out or identify one specific thing, what would it be? Anybody want to try and hazard a guess as to what Gottman concluded is the number one cause of marital breakdown?
Lack of communication.
Lack of communication. Okay, obviously communication's a factor, but it wasn't communication. Well, let me leave it open for a moment. Davidson saying bad communication. Okay. Any others?
It's
unfaithfulness. You mean in terms of
breaking trust as well?
Breaking trust? Yeah. Okay. That's a biggie. Anybody else? What do you think? All right, let me tell you what Gottman concluded. He said the number one cause of marital breakdown is that couples stop being friends. It's as simple as that. Couples stop being friends. And I guess the things that you've just mentioned there can very well be part of that. But what he indicates is that couples they just stop deepening the intimate relationship that they have with one another. He speaks about the concept of marital drift, and that is a gradual shift from positive interactions to a negative focus. And it's like if you buy a new car, and when you start driving that new car, everything is sweet, everything's hunky-dory, everything's working well. But the longer you have that car, wear and tear, takes its toll. And eventually you hear little noises, in the engine and things creaking and things are not working the way they should. And what can happen is that your attention is drawn to what is not working well. Same thing can happen in a marriage. So when a couple get married, in that initial stage, everything's great, the honeymoon stage, it's very easy to overlook things that you don't necessarily like. But the more time you spend with the individual, sometimes even the things that brought you together can be the very things that begin to irritate, the differences, because it is a tendency that opposites attract. And the things that are opposite, that attracted you in the first place, can become the sources of irritation. So Gottman talks about this concept of marital drift that can easily happen. And what's indicative about marital drift is that it happens naturally. It's like just walking up a down escalator. In order to go down, all you have to do is stop and it will take you down. And the marriage can be like that. If you're not journeying forward, if you're not improving, if you're not working on the relationship, it can automatically lose its vigor, as it were. Mark 4. Jesus speaks about the parable of the sower. And he says, they hear the word immediately, receive it. I think it's stony ground. Immediately receive it with gladness, and they have no root in themselves, and so they endure only for a time. Afterward, when tribulation or persecution arrives for the word's sake, immediately they stumble. So some marriages can be like this. If they have not good soil in order to take root in, then all that initial love and could be infatuation, those warm fuzzy feelings that come along with a relationship. There's nothing to sustain it if they have not or unable to develop deep roots in their relationship. So marital drift is a natural part of any relationship, which needs to be, couples need to work against it. Again, Genesis 2:18, that we looked at that tells us that we are created for connection. And this thing about connection, it's not about geography. If we can mute our mics, please. It's not about geography. It's not about how physically close we are to people, because it is easy to feel lonely in a crowd. You can be in a venue of thousands of people and still feel lonely. The main factor there is emotional connection, heart connection. Robin Williams said this. He said, I used to think, this is comedian Robin Williams, who sadly took his life a few years ago. He said, I used to think that the worst thing in life was to end up alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people who make you feel alone. And sadly, this can be the case in a marriage relationship. that couples who enter marriage with high hopes of what that marriage is going to be can be sadly disappointed when the emotional input that they hoped for does not materialize. And when marital drift gets to a point where couples are living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, but they're living in different worlds. They are not opening their hearts to each other. There's no real connection. That can lead to what Williams spoke about, is this feeling of being alone, which is even worse than it would be had they remained by themselves. So again, it's about the heart connection. Gottman speaks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and they are criticism, and these are characteristics of a dying relationship. Criticism focuses on the person rather than the issue. And we'll unpack this more when we look at the section, the session on conflict resolution next time we meet. But I'll just touch on it now. So criticism focuses on the person rather than the issue. Contempt is the second aspect, and he describes this as the sulfuric acid of relationship. So this is like the looking down our nose at the other person as if they are less than we are. Defensiveness. This is counter-complaining. This is where somebody may raise a legitimate concern within the relationship, and rather than addressing that legitimate concern, the other person comes back with a criticism of their own. So stonewalling is the 4th horseman, and stonewalling is complete shutdown of communication, and this can be very, very frustrating. Now, each one of these may be exhibited in a marriage, and it may not be so detrimental to the marriage if they happen occasionally and they are addressed appropriately. But it is when these are rampaging through the marriage, when they become the default way of communication, that's when they kind of start hammering the nails in the coffin for the marriage, because it is impossible to develop an intimate relationship of trust when these elements are constantly present within the marriage relationship. But here's the reality. It is impossible for human beings to live together for any length of time and not hurt each other. It's impossible. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 8, Paul says, but those who marry will face many troubles in this life. And what Paul was saying is reality. Those troubles may come from the outside, but there will also be internal struggles, simply because when couples come together, I think somebody described it as two cultures coming together. They may be coming from different backgrounds. Their upbringing may be different. Their value systems may be different. And many things in common, and hopefully all those will be picked up in the premarital preparation. But yet, no matter how good the premarital preparation is, couples will still be bringing differences into the marriage. And it is in working out those differences that troubles can come. So this is inevitable. And couples should not be fazed by the fact that they experience problems in their relationship. In fact, that it's if they don't experience challenges in their relationships, that itself may indicate a problem. It may indicate that one person has merged themselves into the other and don't and feel unable to express their own views. So conflict is not necessarily a problem. It's a reality. Here is another reality, that marriage is a union of two imperfect people. And if we accept that, then we should not expect perfection in our spouse if we ourselves are not perfect. We have our own flaws. Before we start pointing the finger, again, that old illustration, remember that there are three pointing back at you. So it's important to remember that marriage is about two imperfect people coming together. The psalmist says, "Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me, born in sin, shapen in iniquity." And because of that itself, again, is going to bring conflict into a marital relationship because of our sinful nature. There was research done by a neuroscientist called Dan Siegel. And Dan Siegel spoke about the fact that when a couple get married, it takes approximately 10 years. And this is if couples are working on their relationship consistently in a healthy way. He says it takes approximately 10 years for a couple to shift from I to we, from a focus on themselves and their own needs to getting to a place where they are more focused on the best for the other person, what is described as agape in the New Testament, which I thought was an interesting finding from neuroscience. Ellen White says very similar. She talks about the fact that when a couple first get married, they are not necessarily united, and that the work of union is the work of the after years. So as much as couples may think they are tight and they're close, and when they get married, it's really the work of the years to come that solidifies the love in their relationship. So we are imperfect people, and we come from dysfunctional families. We do not need to be like the Simpsons in order to be dysfunctional. The term dysfunctional simply means that it does not function in the way that it was intended to function. So when it comes to our families, it is more a case of different levels of dysfunctionality. This is what we are bringing into our marriages. So one of the things that I have found, and as a result spend a lot of time with at the premarital stage, is family of origin issues. And in the early stages of a marriage, couples don't necessarily appreciate how much they are influenced by the families from which they are coming. I remember when I started in family ministries, I wanted to identify families in the Bible who did it right, families who were excellent role models and who I could hold up and say, this, you order your life like this family and you will be fine. And as you probably guessed, I'll struggle to find any. And if you know of any, let me know. Because as David and Diana Garland in their book, Flawed Families of the Bible, point out that, the families in the Bible struggle. They all struggle, no matter how good or not, no matter how dysfunctional they are. That's the reality. All families struggle. So every one of us is born into a dysfunctional family, and everyone carries baggage from the past into their marriages. And it can be years even before the impact of our family of origin really comes to the fore in our marriages. And so it's important to help couples to gain an insight into how they have been impacted by their family of origin, and how their family of origin impacts their current relationship with their partner. Let me write myself a note. I will send you an assessment form that you can use. And it's an assessment form that one of them I was introduced to, myself and my wife, when we attended a marriage retreat for the first time. And it asks us to indicate on that form what we received from our parents in terms of emotional support and love, affection, etc., etc., etc. And coming from a home with a father who was emotionally distant and at times physically abusive, it really had a stark impact on me to actually see on paper the nature of my family of origin experiences. And I remember today, to this day, how much we were both impacted by seeing this thing in black and white on paper, even though we knew it. Obviously, we knew. So if you use these tools that I'm gonna share with you, on them there is a trigger warning that just simply doing that exercise can be very triggering. So be careful how you use it. Good idea to just do it for yourself. But it can be an aid for you in helping couples to assess how their family of origin impacts their current relationships. All right, so emotional baggage represents the things that are negative from our past that we have not resolved, and we bring them into our present relationship. And it can be even simple things. I remember I was at home one time, and as a pastor working from home, I was on the computer. This was very, very early in our marriage. And I was typing away on the computer, and my wife came and she stood by my side, and she was looking at what I was doing on the computer, and she pointed something out that I was doing that could have been done better. And my reaction to what she pointed out was to and she kind of jumped back and kind of and left the room. And I was sitting there. I thought, wow, where did that come from? And I got up and I thought about it for a while. And I got up and went and sat on the bed where she was there, and I said that, when you sort of apologized and said, when you pointed that out, what I heard was my father's voice, because my father was always in the habit of pointing out things that were wrong, things that could be done better. You know, if you've got a B, it should have been an A. If you, no matter what you do, it's like he raised the rung, he raised the standard higher than I could meet. And it was only by reflecting on that that I appreciate the impact that my experience with my father was having on my current experience in my marriage. So it's a small example, but there can be many examples like that that indicate how our family of origin are impacting the way we operate in our relationships now. So here are some of the causes, and there may be many more. This is far from being an exhaustive list. Some causes of emotional baggage: lost relationships, bereavements, divorce, trauma, emotional abuse, physical abuse, dysfunctional relationships, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, disappointment, shame, failure, distorted teachings about God. All of these can leave a residue, leave an impact that we bring into our current relationship. So it is essential that all couples have the benefit of rigorous premarital preparation to identify potential red flags. I've mentioned premarital preparation several times now, and I can't stress it enough how important it is. It is so true that many of the couples that I've worked with, couples who are in crisis, I tend to ask them the question, you know, what was your premarital preparation like? And many of the couples will either say that it was non-existent, or it was a tick box exercise. And for me, that kind of grieves me, because, you know, if you're gonna marry somebody, we do things that are important, and when we're doing things that are important, we do preparation for it. You got an exam to take, you do detailed preparation for it. You know, you're starting a business, you're going to do your research. But something as important as marriage, and you just drift into it. No. So couples need rigorous premarital preparation. If it's not Prepare Enrich, then some of at all. But I'll come back to that a little later. The nature of love couples need to understand. M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled. Now, just I'll give a little rider about this book before I make my point. M. Scott Peck was a humanist who converted to Christianity. And after he converted to Christianity, there was still some residue from his humanistic worldview that spilled over into his Christian experience and into his writing. So when I mentioned this book, the first half of the book, for me, brilliant. The second half of the book, a bit ropey in terms of some of his ideas. But what he describes in terms of love, for me, in the first half of the book, are an excellent description or an expansion on what Paul talks about when he describes agape love. And M. Scott Peck makes a contrast between the real love, being real love, and what he calls the in love experience, which couples can often confuse. So 1 John 4:7, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. And the word love in this passage is agape. Agape there are different types of love, and from the Greek describe different types of love. They described phileo, which is brotherly love, and eros, which is erotic or sensual love. They described storge, which is like parental love, and they described agape, which is a sacrificial love, the other-centered love, the deepest type of love that we can experience, the love which God exhibited when he sent Jesus to die for us on the cross. And so Peck contrasts that deepest level of love with what he calls the in-love experience. And he says that the in-love experience is euphoric, it is self-centered, it is involuntary, it is obsessive, it is effortless, short-lived, and delusional. And yet, because people experience this euphoric type of love, they can often feel that this is what love is. You know, these warm, fuzzy feelings that I have towards this other individual. The type of experience that is highlighted in Hollywood movies. And the problem with it is that it is short-lived. It is self-centered. It is self-centered. It's about how the other person is making me feel. And when love, when a relationship, as it inevitably will do, moves past the honeymoon stage, and couples are no longer getting those warm, fuzzy feelings, when marriage, the real work of marriage kicks in, some couples can conclude, based on their faulty understanding of what love should be, they can conclude that their marriage is dying, or that they no longer love their spouse because they don't feel these warm fuzzies anymore. And some people decide to jump ship, to go and find that new relationship that is going to give them these warm, fuzzy feelings, which is often why couples, even famous couples, marry time and time and time again, because they're not experiencing. If we can mute our mics, please. Can we just check our mics and mute, please?
No, can you please make me as a co-host? I cannot unmute.
Okay, forgotten how to do that. All right, let me sort that out once we break.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so the contrast between the in love experience and the real love experience. We need to help couples to understand the difference between the two. So real love unites reason and emotion. It is an act of the will. So love does even when it doesn't feel like doing. We were speaking before we started. We were having a conversation about caring, being a carer, and that requires sacrifice. You don't necessarily feel like cleaning up mess. You don't feel like doing some of the tasks that's involved in caring, but you do it because you love. So love cannot be dependent upon nice feelings. It is an act of the will. It's something that we do as an outworking of a principle. It takes effort, and I don't want to. We should not make marriage sound like a like a trudge and work and a burden that we have to endure. No, marriage is a blessing, and we really need to uphold it as a blessing. But it's a blessing that we enjoy as a result of the work that we put in. It does take effort. And it is genuinely interested in the growth of the other person, which takes us back to what I was saying before about the shift from the I to the we. That if we are genuinely interested in the growth of the other person, we will sacrifice, we will make decisions to bless the other person. So yeah, and that helps to deal with the selfishness within us. Ellen White talks about this. One of the reasons why God allows us to enjoy relationships and to experience some challenges in our relationships is to deal with the selfishness within us. She talks about why God allows trials in our lives, and part of that is to deal with the selfishness that leads us to seek Him. So the fact that we have these experiences, these challenges in our lives, are opportunities for us to grow as we extend agape love to those in our lives. 1 Corinthians 13, another of Paul's, the other of Paul's descriptions about what constitutes to love. Love is patient, kind, does not envy, does not boast, is not proud, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not easily angered, records no wrongs, delights not in evil, rejoices with truth, always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. This is the bar. And this is not something that we can accomplish in our own strength. We need God's Spirit operating in our lives in order for us to live according to this standard. But what it does indicate is that love is a decision. This doesn't happen by accident, and it's a decision to allow Christ to abide in our hearts. Because when it comes to, say, patience, it is the time that we spend in God's presence that gives us the capacity to be patient. Because if we haven't spent that time with Him beforehand, when the situation arises, we will operate according to our natural leaning. One of my favorite all-time authors from back in the day, Maurice Venden, says, if you don't have the money in the bank, don't write a check. If you haven't spent the time in God's presence and received his grace and His love, when the challenges come, we will simply react to it based upon where we are in our experience. But if we are spending that time with Him, our natural response will be the outflow of the time that we have spent with Him. So while the in-love experience is short-lived, can be delusional, can be self-centered, that doesn't mean that the experience of romance should not be present in our marriages. It's not romantic stage and then agape stage and then the romance that no longer exists. It's no longer important. No. It's not about that. Real love does not mean the end of romance. And when we, in fact, let me throw the question out. If I was to ask you to give a definition of romance, how would you describe romance? What is romance? What is romance? It's a difficult question, I know, but Anybody want to take a stab? How would you define romance? No,
Could I have a go at a stab at it?
please.
Would you say it's that sort of intoxicating, heady feeling that you have at the beginning of a relationship, where there is love, but it is that warm and fuzzy feeling that you described earlier, and that it can be euphoric, as you said, and it can have obsessional qualities to it as well. So it's the warm, fuzzy feelings, just to put it simplistically, that we feel at the beginning of a relationship.
Yeah. But how about once in a long-term relationship, in throughout the marriage, should we be looking for that same kind of experience? If we've been married for many years, is that realistic?
So I think if you have the deep friendship that you talked about earlier, that is the root, isn't it, of having your commitment and trust. So if you deepen that friendship, you can have romance as well, but not the romance that Hollywood talks about.
Yeah.
The romance that's over in such a short space of time. Because after you have the romance, then you've got to have the relationship, and you've got to deepen that relationship. And as you talked about it, Les, it's very much around the friendship.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's intentional. We as the statement says there, that real love does not mean the end of romance. There's a guy called Jimmy Evans, and he describes romance as self-initiated pursuit. Self-initiated pursuit. And what he means by that is that romance is something we do intentionally to show our spouse that we are thinking about them, that we are interested in them, that we're making them a priority. And that's going to be different for different people. So not all women, for example, like flowers. How we demonstrate romance should be dependent upon our knowledge of our spouse. And then once we know our spouse, we know what they like, we know what helps them to feel affirmed and good and heady and all of that stuff. Then we act in intentional ways to show how important that person is in our lives. Which is why there is no kind of one size fits all. You can't buy a book to tell you this is the way that you should be romantic towards your spouse. No, this requires you to do some very personal work. Yeah.
The love maps. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It doesn't happen by accident. We have to be intentional. So marriages erode when couples allow the skill of romance to die, and this can be simply a result of laziness. When we're in those initial stages, when we're trying to get to know the person, and we're in that courting stage or the dating stage, and you're making an effort, you're putting your best foot forward. But then sometimes when couples get married, it's like, okay, that's it, done now. I've accomplished the goal. I don't have to try anymore. And it's interesting that the term is used. It's the skill of romance. It's something that we can develop. It's something that we can learn to do. I love the concept of the 5 love languages. This is it's not a new concept. And Gary Chapman wrote his book, The 5 Love Languages, and he identified the 5 as words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. And think about this in terms of your own relationships. And this is not just in terms of romantic relationships. It's in terms of all relationships. They can apply to other dynamics of relationship, parenting relationship, and friendships, and whatever. But the idea behind the love languages is that we all have a way or a preference in terms of how we best receive love. And what the tendency is that we tend to show love to others in a way that we like to receive love. Now, that can be a problem if the other person's love language is different from our own love language. So for one couple, the wife may have quality time and physical touch as her love languages. For the husband, his love language may be words of affirmation and acts of service. But if the wife then tries to express her love to her husband by focusing primarily on the way that she most likes love, there might not be a proper effective connection there. So again, it's about knowing the other person and loving them in the way that they best like to feel love. Now, that might not be easy. Chapman talks about the fact that there are 5 love languages, but there are many dialects. There are untold number of ways that we can express love. And that couples cannot rely on their native tongue if their spouse does not understand it. I don't know how many of you as adults have learned a new language. When I was doing my doctorate, not my doctorate, when I was studying at Newbold for the ministry, doing my MA, my BA and then the MA, I had to learn biblical Hebrew and biblical Greek. And I hold my hands up. I left the Hebrew and the Greek at Newbold because it is not easy to learn a new language in adulthood. Children can learn languages quite easily when the brain is more malleable. But learning a new language in adulthood is not necessarily easy. And the principle can apply in terms of our relational dynamics too. So it takes effort, but it can be done. We had a couple who came to my church in Walthamstow when I was in pastoral ministry, and they described how that the husband had come from a very Germanic background. There was not much in terms of emotions and words of affection and praise, and his wife came from a background where they celebrated everything and they were all hugs and kisses and he said, and I quote, that he found that level of physical touch, he found it abusive. That's how he described it. That's how his background had so messed him up in that way. But then he said because of his wife and her needs, he had to learn how to be physically affectionate. Put your hands out, separate them, move close, close your arms. And he said for him it was something that he had to learn, but he learned it. He learned it because he loved his wife, and that's the way she needed to experience love. John 15:5. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. This is something, again, that we have to rely on God's grace to accomplish. The love maps. So we will touch on what is a love map. They refer to the part of the brain where married couples store all the personally important information about their partner's life. Love maps work on the principle that emotionally intelligent couples know the little things that their spouse's life about their spouse's life, which create a strong foundation for friendship and intimacy. And the point that one of the points that Gottman makes is that love maps need to be updated on a periodical basis, because who we were when we got married is not necessarily the same person that we are now. So it is about knowing the little things and asking the key questions. You know, what are your what are your greatest fears? What are your greatest desires? What are your greatest plans? You know, and this works in other relationships too with our children. You know, who are your best friends? You know, what's your favorite color? All of these details constitute the love map, which is constantly being updated so that we know the other person intimately, and because we know them, we can be intentional about loving them in the best way. And that requires a two-way relationship in which we open our hearts to each other. So this is David in his relationship with God saying, "Search me, O God, know my heart, try me and know my thoughts," giving God full access into his heart. This idea of knowing, Adam Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and became. Yeah, the word "knew" refers to sexual union, but it has the same root as this term "to know" in John 17 and verse 3 in the Greek. In the Hebrew, the word is yada. In the Greek, it's ginosko. The two terms are related. They refer to this deep, intimate knowing. And this is life eternal, that they may know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. So the depth of emotional connection is dependent upon the degree to which couples know each other. And that knowing is characterized by sensitive responsiveness, trust, and emotional availability. And all of these feed into each other as relationships deepen. So trust is about confidence, the confidence that our spouse can be relied upon to always tell the truth and to make good judgments. Emotional availability, to be emotionally available, giving full attention and listening concern whenever they need us. And sensitive responsiveness, to be sensitively responsive, means that we can receive our spouse's innermost thoughts, feelings, needs, and desires readily without judgment. And that's important, because if you bare your heart and you receive an adverse response, you're going to be reticent about sharing in the future. So we need all of these combined together to create that safety within our marriages. This is a point we touched on earlier. Another one of Gottman's sound marital house steps, as it were. That couples in happy marriages tend to like each other. You know, it's like an obvious statement. Most of the time, you know, sometimes we feel like we, you know, that we want to tear our hair out. We don't like the other person too much, but that's momentary. Couples in happy marriages tend to like each other. Because happy marriages are based on deep friendship. This is an in-depth study that John Gottman did, the Marriage Clinic, and he refers to the attachment bond the attachment bond of a couple, above all else, is the most crucial factor to the health and longevity of our marriage. We touched on this in, I think, the second session, the importance of our attachment bond. And again, that is related to our family of origin, our attachment styles, which can change when we enjoy a consistent, healthy attachment. As part of nurturing fondness and admiration, we can create a culture of appreciation as opposed to a culture of criticism. And this is the antidote to the marital drift. So the way to call a halt to marital drift is to be intentional about looking for what's good in the marital relationship. So look for things to complement. You may appreciate them inwardly, but if you don't state it outwardly, it will not necessarily benefit the health of the relationship. In the spiritual context, David says, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall be continually in my mouth. This is an intentional decision that he made, in spite of all the challenges that he had in his life, that he would praise the Lord. The principle operates also in our marriages, where we can create this culture of appreciation, and Gottman identifies that in order to have a happy marriage, there needs to be a ratio of 5 positive interactions against 1 negative interaction. But he says in the happiest marriages, the ratio is around 25-1. So that if that's the case, the 1 negative interaction pales into insignificance because of the context, the overall context of positivity within the relationship. But where it falls below that 1 in 5, then marriages are in trouble. So marriage should be honored by all according to Hebrews, and honor is the foundation of all healthy relationships. This is another excellent book by Gary Smalley and John Trent called Love is a Decision. I think I read that about 30 years ago. It's not a long book, but it's excellent principles in there, and one of them highlights the idea of honor in a relationship. Strong's Concordance says that this represents the word honor, time in the Greek. It indicates value, money paid or valuables, by analogy, esteem of the highest degree, that which is precious of great price. So if couples treat each other like, the wives treat their husbands like a king, and then the husbands treat their wives like a queen, they're not going to go far wrong, because they're investing a great value in one another. All right, we're going to take a break in about, we'll say 5 minutes. We'll take a break, and then we'll probably continue this session and then go into the following session afterwards. So, strengthening marriage. One of the things that we can do is marriage mentoring. We can encourage this within our churches, where we identify couples who have been getting it right for decades, who have healthy marriages, who can then come alongside newly married couples. So what we're looking to achieve in terms of supporting marriages is, from the premarital stage, good preparation. When they're first married, we want to give them excellent support, because what the research has found is that the first year of marriage can be particularly challenging. So if we can give couples support during that stage, it can stand them in good stead going forward. So mentors walk alongside the newly married couple. They provide healthy, realistic role modeling. They identify resources, they provide male-female perspective, they normalize disagreements and conflicts, they describe their own marital journey, difficulties and solutions discovered. This can be so important in that first year for new married couples. And what it does, it spreads the load. It's not just dependent on, say, the pastor, or it doesn't. The newly married couple are not left high and dry. They've got a support system that they can lean on. What marriage mentors are not, and this is important to appreciate, they're not perfect. And this is a benefit, because when you see people who portray themselves as perfect, they're a big turnoff. Mentors show that, you know what, the challenges that you're experiencing, they're normal. They're not counselors or therapists. They're not intruders or meddlers. There are some things that should be kept between the couple. Funnily enough, yesterday we were with friends, and we have just celebrated our 30th year of marriage, and they came out, surprised us with a bunch of cakes in the form of 30, and then afterwards, after we blew out all the candles, they started questioning us about how we got together, what our story was, and then one of the young ladies asked a question, to which my response was, none of your business. Because there are certain things that should be kept between the couple, and for mentors, they need to be careful to maintain, allow the couple to have their privacy. They're not experts. They're not the final authorities on all situations. They're not a parental replacement for the couple. They're not rescuers. And the relationship is not long term, although they may be present for them over a long period. The actual formal mentoring process should not be a long term situation. All right, we're going to break there. We'll come back, finish off this session on marriage, and then go into communication. So let's take.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
When I was trying to get in, I heard a sentence, but I'm not sure if it's quite correct, that marriage was never meant for our happiness, for ourselves, for our own happiness, and then I didn't hear the rest. This is something you said.
I can't remember exactly what I said, but I think what I was expressing is that when marriage is primarily for our own benefit, it will not be successful. So there needs to be, we need to be looking to express agape love, which looks for the best in the other person. And then when the other person is doing the same, then that marriage is going to be successful, because we the best blessing that we can experience is when we see the other person blessed. That's where our happiness should extend.
Yeah, that was the idea.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that we should never desire things for ourselves. That's not realistic. But if it's only about our benefit, that's where the problem is. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for the question. All right. Let's take a break and come back at 25:02. Is that okay? I'm not hearing any dissenters, so let's come back at 25:02, and then we'll finish off. All right.
Recording in progress.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Let's crack on. Let's finish off on strengthening marriage. So we've just looked at the importance of marriage mentoring, something that we can operate within our church, and there are resources, particularly there is a package for marriage mentoring that's been produced by Les and Leslie Parrott. That is it's excellent self-contained resource that you can use for marriage mentoring. But there are other resources out there that you can use. An intimate connection with each other will lead to a closer love connection with God and vice versa. So again, this is foundational to the marriage, as the relationship that the individuals have with God. And we'll make the point about the spiritual connection that a couple has should be an outgrowth of their relationship with God. The Bible says in Ephesians 5, from verse 31, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church." And Paul here is not, the connection that he makes between the marriage and the church is not accidental. We see this motif throughout the Bible. God alluding to his relationship with his people as one, it's like a marriage. And what we're being told here is that the nature of the marriage relationship should mirror the relationship that God has with his church. Ellen White says this in Steps to Christ: "Prayer is the opening of the heart to God as to a friend." Now, this has implications for couple spirituality, because when you open your heart to God as to a friend, you're making yourself completely vulnerable to him. It's like David when he says, "Search me, O God." Now, you're not going to do that with God in the presence of somebody with whom you don't feel safe. So the emotional safety that a couple have with each other is foundational to how open they can be in the presence of God with each other. I used to think that, if in order to have a healthy relationship with other people, you first have to have this great connection with God. And that's true, but it works both ways. God uses our human relationships in order to teach us about him. And if we have not cultivated this strong emotional connection with each other, in which we can be vulnerable, in which we can safely share our hearts, you're not going to do that in a spiritual context. So that's where what we said before about spirituality being the umbrella, and our emotions, our physicality, our intellect are different aspects of our spirituality. So there is no intimacy without vulnerability. And that means that a healthy love relationship requires courage. Paul says in his spiritual relationship, "Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities for Christ's sake, for when I am weak, then I am strong." There are some people who have come from backgrounds where they feel vulnerability is weakness. My dad was very much of that ilk, and he was a person who had a stroke when he was 39, and I am convinced that one of the reasons why was his inability to process his emotions in a healthy way. Up to that point, everybody thought that he was a rock. Nothing could disturb him. But he carried a lot of stress, and that stress took its toll. So allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, sharing our hearts with others in a safe context is vital for not only our spiritual health, our emotional health, but also our physical health. Here's another way I mentioned before that we can strengthen marriage. Prepare and Rich is an excellent tool for not only marital preparation, but also marital support. I've had the privilege of being a trainer for Prepare and Rich now for several years. It's just an excellent tool. It's just an excellent tool. So it's a program to help couples prepare for marriage or enrich their relationship by taking stock of their strengths and growth areas. With the help of trained practitioners, they developed skills which are key to any relationship. And what I love about Prepare and Rich is that it just makes the task of marital support and premarital support so simple, because they ask all the key questions, and the couple go online, they fill out this questionnaire, and it prepares a report which outlines all the areas that you need to spend time on. And in addition to Prepare and Rich in terms of marital preparation, there's also a tool called the Couple Checkup, where couples can, who have been married for some time, do like an MOT of their marriage. They can go online, fill out an assessment, but this time they don't need to have a third person to take them through the questionnaire. They get the results and they can go through it by themselves, and it's another brilliant tool to help couples just do that stock take of their relationship to see how they're doing and how they can improve. So again, that's something that you can encourage in your churches, and also let me come on to that in terms of the types of programs that we can put on. And one of the things that I tried to encourage when I was at conference level was to encourage local churches to be doing these programs, like marriage retreats, marriage workshops, seminars, to create environments that allow couples to nurture their relationships in safe situations. So my first experience of doing marriage retreat was after I had attended one that was organized by Bernie and Karen Holford when they were family ministry leaders at the SEC. And then one of the couples in my church wanted to do a marriage retreat locally, and they got in contact with Bernie and Karen, and they were not available. Bernie and Karen said, "Look, your pastor has just attended one. Ask them to do it," and along with my wife. And we were just so daunted by the prospect, but we just took the things that we learned in that seminar and we just replicated it for the local church, and it was such a success. It was a brilliant way of bringing couples together, creating a safe environment where people were willing to share in a way that they wouldn't have felt comfortable doing in the local church situation. So, and as a result of that, what we found was relationships were formed doing this local marriage retreat. Relationships were formed that to this day are still strong because of the type of sharing that went on within that weekend. I mentioned yesterday I was with some friends, the friends that we were with yesterday were part of that marriage retreat back then, and that helped to solidify the kind of relationship that we have now. So think about doing something on a local level and not just relying on what's provided at conference level or what's provided at the union level. These are things which local churches can do themselves, and if you don't have folks who can facilitate them at the local level, by all means invite people in. But yeah, again, we can be intentional about creating these types of forum where couples can enjoy learning and just developing more healthy relationships. Couple counseling. When couples require outside intervention, it's important to know where to signpost them. I was asking Dee before we started about couple counseling in the North. That's one avenue. So at the North England Conference, the counseling service that Dee manages, that's one avenue that we can point people to if they need couple counseling support. In the South England Conference, you have Cornerstone Counseling, and there are the other options that people can identify. But it would be good if we as family ministry leaders are aware of the different signposting or different organizations that we can signpost people to if they need support, and to normalize counseling support, because there is still a bit of a stigma that's attached to couples getting counseling. People don't want to admit that things are not working as they should. But look, if your washing machine breaks down, you bring somebody in. If your car's not working, you bring in an expert. If your marriage is not working and you don't have the wherewithal to sort it out, get some advice from somebody who can support. This is just a something I came across, which summarizes the kind of support that we can strive to provide in our churches. And let me say that you're not going to be able to do all of this. You're just not, because the time and the resources are not there. But the idea is that we can support marriages from beginning to end, in terms of premarital support, building relationship skills, marriage mentoring, marriage enrichment, and when marriages don't survive, we still have a role to play in terms of divorce recovery ministry. It can be particularly difficult for couples if they experience divorce, in terms of all types of factors, grandparents, the impact that it has on children, the impact that it has on the friendships that they had previously. So we have a ministry there to support.
Les, do you think we could have a copy of that? Because I can't quite see it. So.
Yeah, no problem. What I will do is all of the presentations that we have done thus far, you will get a PDF copy of all of them. So I'll strive this week to send out all of those PDFs. So yeah. All right. In rounding off this session, live joyfully with the wife with whom you love. Ellen White says this: let there be mutual love, mutual forbearance. Then marriage, instead of being the end of love, will be, as it were, the very beginning of love, the warmth of true friendship. The love that binds heart to heart is a foretaste of the joys of heaven. I mentioned before that, sometimes marriage can be portrayed as like a drudgery, and people have this negative attitude. what the research actually shows is that the vast majority of people who are married would still choose to get married if they were given the choice again. Most people are happy in marriage. But it's the ones that go pear-shaped that get the press. So we need to portray marriage as something that is a blessing, because it is a blessing.